The North wants to pull back. The center wants to pull back too. Well, the South already did, but yeah. What? Oh, no. He says nobody gets to. Yeah, nobody. Okay. December 19th, 1941. The Allies are at war in the Atlantic Ocean. The Allies are at war in the Mediterranean. The Allies are at war in the South China Sea. In fact, they are at war at sea all over the world. But recent events, especially those of last week, have contributed to a lack of capital ships, and they are absolutely vital to protect Allied merchant shipping. This week, that lack gets even worse. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the war changed in an enormous way when the Japanese launched a massive invasion all over Southeast Asia of many lands at once to take the resources they need and create a huge empire. They also preemptively attacked the US Pacific Fleet at anchor in Hawaii. Since the other Axis powers have now mostly also declared war on the US, and most of the allies on Japan, the war is very much now global. On the Eastern Front, having failed to reach Moscow, the German army is on the defensive as the Red Army counterattacks. In North Africa, the siege of Tobruk finally ends after these many months as the Axis forces pull back there as well, opening up several new airfields to the British Desert Air Force. In the East, however, by the end of last week, the Japanese had ruined the British airfields in Malaya to such a degree that the British had 10 planes left in northern Malaya. On the 10th, they were ordered to Singapore. We saw the sinking of Britain's Prince of Wales and Repulse last week, though, so it is really now up to the army to hold Malaya and Singapore. The 11th Indian Division had been deployed on the trunk line down the west side of Malaya to prevent Japanese advance. But as last week ended, a concentrated attack had broken the lines and captured the two advanced battalions who were to delay the Japanese at Jitra. That evening, the 12th, General David Murray Lyon ordered a withdrawal, but this turned into a major rout, with the Indian Division losing most of its artillery and motor vehicles. This was bad to such a degree that military historian Brian Farrell, who teaches at Singapore University, has this to say about it. Jitra was, without a doubt, the most incompetently fought battle by a British Empire division in the Second World War. Fewer than 1,500 Japanese troops routed a division of 14,000. It isn't over. Murray Lyon pulls back to new positions at Guran, but the Japanese hit these the 14th, doing serious damage as the week rolls on and pushing it back, with the Japanese advancing some 20 kilometers per day. The Japanese relentlessly pressed their attack with a well-balanced advance guard of infantry, armor, engineers, and light artillery. They traveled light and achieved remarkable mobility without logistical penalty by placing their unmotorized infantry on bicycles. At each contact, they would either smash down the road with armor or loop off the road around flanks. A side note from Malaya this week, Major Mohan Singh, a Sikh POW, agrees with the Japanese to set up a special unit for Burmese, Thai, and Indians who do not want British or French rule to return in Asia. In a few weeks, he will agree to lead an Indian National Army to fight against the British. But the British have their hands full fighting all over right now. At the end of last week, Hong Kong Garrison Commander Christopher Maltby ordered the withdrawal of all of his forces to Hong Kong Island itself. As this week begins, at 9 a.m. December 13th, a Japanese staff officer brings a surrender demand from Takashi Sakai's 23rd Army. A failure to comply will result in heavy bombardment. Governor Sir Mark Young rejects both this demand and another one the 17th. The bombing is severe. Fires break out everywhere and are out of control in several regions, especially where the water mains are burst. Japan has infiltrators in the city and has also bought the services of several triad members. So Japanese assault crews are guided around and past defensive points. And some people responsible for logistics for the city defense disappear. In response, British leaders allied themselves with the Chinese Nationalist Secret Services led by Liaison Officer Admiral Chak Chan. The Admiral delicately nicknamed his vigilantes the Loyal and Righteous Charitable Organization. Much of their charity consisted of an executioner's bullet, freely dispensed by the hundreds in a shared counter-terror campaign with the elements of the Hong Kong police that remained loyal. This ruthless suppression curtailed, but did not entirely halt, fifth column activity. There are reports of a nationalist army relief force coming, 3 divisions of the 63rd Army, but the Japanese 23rd Army stations a force to block them, and the Japanese 11th Army attacks toward Changsha soon to come will pull forces away from any relief of Hong Kong. On the night of the 18th, the Japanese 38th Division lands on the northeastern coast of Hong Kong Island and overwhelms the Indian Army Battalion defending there. On the 19th, as the week ends, the British East Brigade withdraws southward. This creates a gap between East and West Brigades that the Japanese might soon exploit. Japan is also invading the Philippines, with landings on Luzon beginning already last week. It is Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa's 14th Army that is given the job. Some 62,000 men with plenty of artillery and 52 light and 36 medium tanks. The 3rd Fleet gives naval support, and there are over 400 planes from both Army and Navy air fleets. The Japanese achieved a spectacular technical breakthrough in establishing that the Mitsubishi A6M2 Zero fighter with drop tanks could fly on a combat mission to a radius of 550 miles. In other words, from the Japanese bases on Formosa to the central Philippines. No other fighter aircraft in the world matched this feat, and it contributed enormously to the surprise of the initial Japanese attacks. Those attacks I talked about last week, and they destroyed a large part of the Far East Air Force, rendering what's left ineffective. In fact, on the 19th, the remainder of the FEAF pretty much concedes the Philippines when the surviving B-17s fly away to northern Australia. But so many of the fighter planes were destroyed last week that there is no possible local air control for the Americans. At the end of the week, on the night of the 19th, 500 Japanese land at Davao on Mindanao, supported by the carrier Ryujo. Also in Southeast Asia, on the 13th, the British evacuate Victoria Point Airfield in the south of Burma on the Kra Isthmus. The Japanese occupy it, and on the 16th, Japan invades Borneo, with landings at Miri, Syria, and Lutong. The British and Dutch set fire to the oil facilities before they pull out. The South China Sea is not the only sea to see a lot of action this week. On the 13th, in the Mediterranean, 2 Italian cruisers trying to supply troops in North Africa with fuel are sunk off Cape Bon by 3 British and 1 Dutch destroyer. Also that day, a major Italian convoy for Benghazi begins with protection from the main Italian fleet, including 4 battleships. A British sub sinks 2 transports that day, and the battleship Vittorio Veneto is damaged the next day. That ship is damaged while returning to port, though, because the convoy attempt is abandoned thanks to a successful British radio deception that convinced the Italians that the whole British fleet was nearby. Also the 14th, the British cruiser Galatia is sunk by a German sub off Alexandria. But there is a bunch more Mediterranean naval action to come this week. The Italians try another convoy, setting out the 16th, with 4 battleships, 5 cruisers, and 21 destroyers running guard duty. Now, already the 15th, the British begin a naval operation to supply Malta from Egypt. That's Force B from Alexandria, which is joined the 17th by Force K from Malta. That night, the 2 enemy convoys run into each other. Well, their covering forces run into each other, but both sides are more interested in protecting their convoys than in really fighting. So the 18th, the British convoy reaches Malta and Force B heads home, but Force K looks for the Italians. That night, though, it runs into a minefield, and the light cruiser Neptune, leading Force K, hits a mine and sinks. 766 crew are lost, and there is 1 survivor. They also lose a destroyer, and the other 2 cruisers are damaged. Also, 3 Italian human torpedoes enter Alexandria Harbor, taking advantage of the nets being open to allow Force B back in, and badly damage battleships Queen Elizabeth and Valiant with explosive charges. The harbor is shallow here, and though neither ship touches the bottom, both are sunk enough to be put well out of any action, even though the decks are clear. The British will maintain the illusion of full operational status during the many months it will take to fix and refit either ship. So the Italians don't realize just how successful they've been, knocking out the Mediterranean fleet's 2 battleships and the Malta striking force in one and the same night. This also just worsens the lack of capital ships the Allies suddenly have in general worldwide. In the Atlantic this week is also a lot of action. On the 14th, the convoy HG-76 heads from Gibraltar towards Britain, 32 ships strong. The escorts are the carrier Audacity and 12 other ships. For the rest of this week and the beginning of next, 12 U-boats will attack the convoy, but 5 of them are sunk and 2 Condor planes are shot down. One of the submarine commanders lost is Captain Engelbert Endras from U-567, the reigning submarine ace of aces. On the Allied side, Audacity will be sunk the 21st. The Allies will also lose 2 merchant ships and a destroyer. But though the Allies are suffering setbacks at sea and in Southeast Asia, they are advancing in the USSR. As the week begins, new possibilities seem to be around the corner for the Soviet Red Army. The weather has warmed from its super frost levels, and successes have come up and down the line. Georgy Zhukov gives a general directive to his Western Front to bring the whole front forward to a new line by the 16th. Klin is taken the 15th, Kalinin the 16th. The taking of the latter impels Stavka to transfer the 30th Army away from Zhukov's Western to Ivan Konev's Kalinin front, since now Konev can strike southwest into the rear of the German 9th Army, whose whole eastern wing must retreat. With Kalinin and Yelets in Soviet hands, and with the unhinging of the German center, a strategic operation on an immense scale was already printing itself across the Soviet decision maps. Now as never before, even in the days of nightmarish defeat, was there an immense premium on the correct decision and on the most scrupulous use of military resources. On the 17th, Kirill Merezkov gets orders that he will command the new Volkov front, which is to defeat German Army Group North and relieve the siege of Leningrad. He will have his forces all ready next week. Speaking of Army Group North though, on the 15th, its commander Wilhelm von Lieb asks Adolf Hitler for permission for his group to make a general withdrawal. Hitler says no and drafts a halt order. Any large-scale retreat by major sections of the army in midwinter, given only limited mobility, insufficient winter equipment, and no prepared positions in the rear, must inevitably have the gravest consequences. To the southeast of Lieb, Pavel Kurochkin's Soviet Northwestern Front gets their objective on the 18th. They are to take Smolensk, far in the German rear. This strike would be between Army Groups North and Center. And then they're to drive into Center's rear. But Kurochkin sees issues with this. First of all, he's ordered to make flanking attacks in multiple directions, and he doesn't think he has the logistics for that. But Joseph Stalin and Red Army Chief of Staff Boris Shaposhnikov permit no alteration of the main plan. Kurochkin makes his preparations, but the supply issues grow so bad that his chief of rear services is put on military tribunal. His assault groups have no food. Not some food, no food. Stalin takes personal control of the counteroffensive this week and orders Zhukov, Konev, and Southwestern Front Commander Semyon Timoshenko to plan for broader operations. Meanwhile, in the far south, the Battle of Sevastopol begins the 17th with attacks by the German 54th Corps. Now, also down south, Hitler was unable to reverse Gerd von Rundstedt's evacuation and withdrawal from Rostov a few weeks ago. This week, he agrees that Army Group Center can make some local withdrawals, but nothing major until they prepared a new defense line, as his order stipulates. On the 16th, Army Group Center Commander Fedor von Bock asks if he can withdraw if he really thinks it necessary. Army Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch and Chief of Staff Franz Halder also try to convince Hitler that a general withdrawal is called for, but Hitler refuses and instead asks for 13 divisions from other theaters of war to be shifted to the Eastern Front. That, of course, does exactly zero to solve the immediate problem of the Soviets attacking. So on the 18th, Bock gives up his command to Günther von Kluge, ostensibly because of poor health. Hitler orders Kluge to stem the tide. Hitler also accepts Brauchisch's resignation the 19th, taking over himself as Supreme Commander of the German Army. He tells Halder, anyone can do this little matter of operational command. We shall see about that soon enough, I imagine. One other German is having operational issues right now in North Africa. See, the British attempt to outflank Erwin Rommel and his Gazala position this week, but the Stuart tanks in the 4th Armored Brigade don't have the range to really do this. So on the 16th, Rommel orders the retreat completely out of Cyrenaica to avoid the possibility of being cut off by a British cross-desert thrust to Kyhle. What he wants to do is find a spot to regroup and concentrate reinforcements while forcing British Commander Neil Ritchie to operate with long, extended supply lines. And here are a couple of notes to end the week. On the 17th, Admiral Chester Nimitz is appointed to command the U.S. Pacific Fleet, but won't arrive to take charge till Christmas. William Pye is in temporary charge until then. And Reinhard Heydrich recalls a conference in Berlin to discuss the future of European Jews. The gassings that started recently at Chelmno have shown themselves to be quick, effective, and above all, secret. The conference is to take place in January. Hans Frank, who runs the General Government Region, says that what they need are large-scale measures. What those large-scale measures shall be will be decided at the conference. And that brings us to the end of this week. The Japanese advancing all over Southeast Asia and pretty much rolling over the opposition at this point. The Soviets counterattacking, but Stalin personally planning for a big expansion of that, and a lot of action at sea that costs the Allies even more ships that they can't really afford to lose. So Joseph Stalin is insisting on making the upcoming attacks way larger in scope. And Adolf Hitler is ordering that none of his armies, of which he is now the actual commander, are going to retreat anywhere. So what happens when millions of advancing Soviet troops crash into millions of German troops holding their ground? My guess is hundreds of thousands of dead people. Longer supply lines in North Africa is only one of the many challenges of war in the desert. And if you'd like to see how both sides deal with these challenges, then check out our special on desert warfare right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is 1963 Pauk Neapoli. That's P-A-O-K, Pauk and Neapoli, like Napoli, but with an E. Okay, cool. Big thanks to 163 Pauk Neapoli and the whole army for your membership and support. It is you that make all this possible. So join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.